Don't you dare show up at my graduation ceremony. A boring old hag like you will just be everyone's laughing stock. It's my big day, so absolutely do not come. Hearing those words from Kelly made my head spin. It was clear she didn't see me as family. To her, I was just an embarrassment. Hey, old hag, where are you now? The moment I pressed the call button, Kelly's shrill voice pierced my ears. She sounded rushed and full of impatience, almost panicked. You can't just leave a silly note like that and think it's okay. Where are you now? Come back home now. I could hear Jake's voice too. Both of them were freaking out. My name is Lisa. I'm a 41-year-old housewife. I've been juggling a part-time job at the local real estate office while raising my daughter Kelly and doing housework for over a decade. I married my husband Jake 13 years ago. Jake had a daughter, Kelly, from his previous wife. I met Jake at my old workplace, a construction company, where he was there for business. Our company was tough on clients, but Jake, always smiling and cheerful, made a good impression on me. I recommended his products to my company, wanting to be helpful. As a result, his company was chosen. That connection led us to go out for meals several times, and we got deeply involved. He proposed, and I happily accepted, quitting my job to prepare for the wedding. Just before the wedding, Jake revealed that he was living alone with his 5-year-old daughter. At first, I thought it was a lie. It was hard to believe, but it was true. I met Kelly a week before the ceremony. She was maybe shy, hiding behind Jake, and wouldn't come out in front of me. That's when I decided I would live with them for Kelly's sake. I wanted to raise her into a fine adult. I planned to take care of Kelly properly, especially until she graduated from high school. I'm not sure why I felt this way, but her anxious eyes peeking out from behind Jake were unforgettable. I made up my mind and decided to marry Jake. It was my first marriage, and my family was against it. My father was furious and said, "They're mocking you." But I went against my parents' wishes and married Jake. If I had listened to my parents, I might have avoided the trouble that was about to start. 13 years have passed since that marriage. Kelly has turned 17 and is supposed to graduate from high school this year. It should be a joyful occasion, but I couldn't feel genuinely happy. The thought, "I'll make her a fine adult," crossed my mind when I decided to marry Jake. Hey, old hag, where's my t-shirt? Where did you put it? You didn't steal it, did you? 3 years after we started living together, Kelly began calling me old hag. At first, she was kind and gradually got used to me, but one day she started calling me old and her attitude became rough. I pulled the t-shirt out from the folded laundry and handed it to Kelly. Why did you wash it? What if it shrinks? It should have been dry cleaned. You know, you're really clueless, seriously so dumb. I had hand-washed and air-dried the t-shirt because I thought the fabric would get damaged at the cleaners, but I couldn't say that to Kelly. All I could reply was, "I'm sorry." Kelly snatched it from my hand as if she was grabbing it and said, "Really, you're useless," and left with those parting words. Her words were sharp and pierced my heart. I couldn't argue back, so I just apologized. I didn't understand why Kelly had become so rough towards me. At first, I thought she was teased about her father's remarriage, but it seemed that wasn't the case. Around that time, Jake's attitude began to change. He used to smile all the time when he was working, but recently he had stopped showing his smile at home and had become grumpy. He had started calling me hey and you. As Jake's attitude changed, so did Kelly's towards me. I thought there might be something lacking in me, so I made sure not to slack off in household chores and watched over Kelly carefully. I wanted Kelly to grow up to be a respectable adult, but instead, her attitude got worse every day. She called me old hag all the time, and I never heard a thank you from her anymore. It was strange because at parent-teacher conferences, her behavior in class was normal, with no signs of roughness. Jake also talked normally with her and sometimes even smiled. This terrible attitude was only directed at me, which hurt my heart even more. I couldn't talk to Jake about it because he had become distant and completely different from before. I had no one to talk to and felt very alone. Living with a heavy and dark weight on my heart, I was becoming isolated in my own home. Since middle school, Kelly had stopped telling me about school, and Jake attended the events. I had to learn about school events from neighbors. Jake and Kelly seemed to get along well, often going out together. I wanted to be treated as family by them too, and had hoped we could live together happily. It was unbearably painful that it wasn't happening, and Jake's attitude was getting worse. "There's dust on the stairs, clean it up. You're a stay-at-home wife, aren't you? We're running out of toilet paper. Are you even cleaning the bathroom? You really are so clumsy." These were the kinds of things Jake frequently said to me. When we first got married, we each had our roles in household chores. Jake used to do housework while living with Kelly. At first, he was happy that we could share the chores. Now, I'm doing all the household chores. Jake once said that it's ridiculous for a stay-at-home wife to do all the housework. Kelly was an easy child to raise, but somehow that made me feel worse. When I tried to discuss it with Jake, he dismissed it with, "You're not trying hard enough." In the end, it seemed like everything was my fault. The more I tried to talk to Jake, the more a heavy fog clouded my heart. He would nitpick my every small mistake in housework relentlessly. "Can't you even clean properly? Haven't you learned anything all these years? Do you lack learning ability?" Jake looked down on me with disdain. All I could do was apologize. "I'm sorry. I'll try my hardest. Please forgive me." Jake sighed heavily, clearly exasperated. "Even if you try your hardest, you won't be able to do it. That's why you get scolded. Always saying you'll do it, but you've never managed it, have you?" His words continued to chip away at my heart. As time passed, my heart grew weary, and Kelly turned 18. I was curious about Kelly's future plans, but she wouldn't tell me, and Jake wouldn't talk to me about it either. By this time, I had stopped talking to Jake and Kelly unless absolutely necessary. I overheard Kelly and Jake discussing her plans after graduation. I wanted to know, so I stopped and listened. It's settled. I got into college on a recommendation, and I even got a scholarship. "It's all thanks to you, Dad. Thank you." I could hear Kelly's happy voice. She would never speak to me in such a tone. "Good for you. It's the result of your efforts." It was worth pushing all the housework onto the clumsy maid. What an awful thing to say. He must be talking about me. Yeah, it was a good outlet for stress too. I could hear their contemptuous laughter. I quietly left the spot and hid in the bathroom. It was the only place I could be alone. I crouched in the bathroom, held my head, and cried. To think that Jake and Kelly thought of me in such a way. I had endured for the past 12 years. No matter how much my spirit was about to break, I kept being Kelly's mother and Jake's wife. Even when I felt I was at my limit, I forced myself to keep going. There were times when I felt I couldn't get up, but I made myself get up, make lunch, prepare breakfast, and do the laundry and cleaning. If I were honest, I would have preferred to just lie down, but doing so would surely make me no longer needed by Jake and Kelly. That fear kept me going. I spent my days exhausted. Honestly, I don't remember much from that time. One day, when I was out shopping, a neighbor shocked me with the news. The next day was Kelly's high school graduation ceremony. I couldn't admit I didn't know, so I just smiled vaguely and left. As soon as I got home, I collapsed onto the sofa. I had always thought of making Kelly a respectable adult. Graduation from high school was supposed to be a milestone for that. Again, I was the only one left out in this house. I am not allowed to have a smartphone or use a computer. All communication and information came through Jake and Kelly, and they chose to keep me in the dark. I have a simple flip phone that can only make calls. Jake handles all interactions with the school, so I don't even have anyone I can call a mom friend. I have no way to learn about school information. Still, I found out about sports days and performances from neighbors' conversations and kids' chats on their way back from school, and I secretly attended them. I wanted to properly attend the high school graduation and celebrate her step into adulthood. As I was crying on the sofa, Kelly came back from school. "Hey, old hag, what are you slouching around for? It's depressing. You're making the whole house dark. Can't you do something about it?" Kelly glared at me. It was her fault, yet she acted like this. If Kelly had told me the date of the graduation ceremony, I wouldn't have felt this way. For the first time, I felt anger slowly rising from the depths of my heart. "The graduation ceremony is tomorrow, isn't it? Seems like you didn't tell me." I questioned her with a feeling of blame. Kelly looked slightly taken aback by my defiant words, but exaggeratedly sighed to cover it up. "So what? You wouldn't come to the graduation anyway, so why does the date matter to you?" I tilted my head in defiance at Kelly's words. I never said I wouldn't go to the graduation. "Don't come. If a boring old hag like you shows up, you'll be everyone's laughing stock. It's my big day, so definitely do not come." Kelly's words about being everyone's laughing stock made me dizzy. Clearly, Kelly doesn't think of me as family. To her, I am an embarrassment. I thought this time would be different, but she wouldn't see me any other way. "Don't come." Kelly's words pierced my heart. It was clear from her own mouth that I was nothing but a nuisance. That night, Jake came home with a suit and a dry cleaner's bag. He had sent the suit to the dry cleaners himself, without asking me, of course. Jake knew about Kelly's graduation. As I looked at the suit, Jake said with a pitying look and a smirk, "Right, Kelly didn't tell you. Clearly, I am the least needed in this house." Thinking I was family was just my wishful thinking. At that moment, I realized my heart had long reached its limit. That's why I decided to stop being a family. The next day, Jake and Kelly left together for her high school graduation. I was left behind. Moreover, Jake told me, "We'll eat out tonight, so we won't need dinner." I wasn't invited. The old me would have just cried and taken it. But those days ended today. I had decided to leave this house. I made up my mind last night. As soon as they left, I packed my bags, wrote a note, and left the house. I couldn't be a family with Kelly and Jake anymore. I decided to stay at my parents' house, about 3 hours away by train. At my parents' home, I started preparing to cut ties with Jake and Kelly. In the note I left, I wrote that I wanted to end our family relationship and live alone, and that I wished to discuss the details through a lawyer. I hadn't found a lawyer yet, but my father would likely know one. My family owns a lot of land and is known as wealthy landowners in the area. My father also owns considerable real estate and is well known locally. He certainly had lawyers in his circle. I had met a lawyer at a Christmas party when I was at home. Besides finding a lawyer, I had to sell the house where Jake and Kelly were still living. The house was built on land owned by my father, and the construction costs were covered by me as a wedding gift. I had been repaying my father little by little with the money I earned from my part-time job in real estate, which was also introduced by my father. Essentially, the house, both the building and the land, are owned by my father. They are in his name officially. At the time, Jake probably thought the house was a gift since he never asked about the ownership. He was likely too afraid to upset my father and lose the house. Jake is quite the coward. He is aggressively assertive toward those he perceives as beneath him, but to those above him, he is subservient and ingratiating. I explained everything that had happened to my father. As I spoke, tears flowed uncontrollably. I had to stop several times due to my sobbing, but my father listened until the end. There were tears in his eyes too. What comforted me was that my father didn't criticize the decisions I had made back then. In the end, he simply said, "You've had a hard time." Afterwards, my father made calls, and soon lawyers and real estate management people came to the house. Everything happened very quickly after that. It was decided that the house would be demolished, and the demolition was set for 2 weeks later. In the note I left, I wrote, "Please leave within a week." My father sarcastically remarked, "That's quite generous of you." For me, it was just about avoiding later complaints. The week passed as I consulted with the lawyer about the divorce. I also told my mother about the divorce, and we cried together. I can't forget the look on her face, furious, like a demon. I also talked with my father about what would come next. Above all, I needed to set up a new foundation for my life. It took courage to talk to my parents, and it was hard, but once I did, my heart felt lighter, and I slept soundly for the first time in 12 years. A week passed peacefully at my parents' home. Then my cell phone rang. As expected, it was Kelly. Honestly, I didn't want to talk anymore. Remembering how Kelly had treated me all this time, a dark feeling spread through my heart. I decided to ignore the call, but the calls didn't stop. Jake also started calling repeatedly. They were probably calling about the note I left, and maybe the demolition crew had also contacted them. For 12 years, Jake and Kelly had called me old hag and treated me like a servant. The way they treated me was not how family should treat each other. The thought of dealing with them again made my skin crawl, but leaving things as they were wasn't right either. I couldn't move forward without settling the past. If I ran away now and left things unfinished, I wouldn't feel at peace. After the way they treated me, it was time for Jake and Kelly to face the consequences. I braced myself and answered the phone. "Hey, old hag, where are you now?" As soon as I pressed the call button, Kelly's shrill voice pierced my ears. Her tone was rushed, full of impatience and panic. "Leaving a ridiculous note like that, you think that's forgivable? Where are you now? Come back right now." I could hear Jake's voice as well. Both of them were in a complete panic. I imagined Kelly coming home from graduation, finding that this servant-like woman who used to relieve their stress was gone. Moreover, there was a note saying divorce and leave the house. Even Kelly would panic in such a situation, especially on the day of her graduation ceremony. I couldn't help but let out a chuckle at how flustered Kelly was. Who is this?" Kelly seemed surprised by my response and stumbled over her words. I hung up the phone. Afterwards, I called the real estate management company to check when the demolition was starting. It was scheduled for tomorrow as planned, and Jake had already been notified. I asked to postpone the demolition to the day after tomorrow and requested that Jake be informed of the one-day delay. The one-day reprieve was granted. Jake would probably come here then. I was ready to deliver a heavy blow to Jake and Kelly. There were dozens of calls from them, but I ignored them all. The next day, around noon, I heard the doorbell and knocking. It must be Jake and Kelly. They probably wanted to come earlier, but the poor train connections made it take a long time. Jake and Kelly were panting heavily, looking really anxious. I had arranged for my parents to stay out of sight, so it looked like I was the only one home. I showed Jake and Kelly into the living room. Jake entered the house hesitantly, intimidated by my father, who is a wealthy and well-known figure in town with a commanding presence. Jake probably sees himself as beneath my father. On the other hand, Kelly wasn't intimidated at all. She seemed determined to confront me and take me back. Kelly slumped into a chair in the living room, crossing her legs and arms, silently motioning for me to sit opposite her. I prepared tea slowly and calmly before sitting across from her. Growing impatient, Kelly started to speak. "What the heck is all this about?" Jake, who was sitting next to me, placed the note I had left on the table. I just stared silently into Kelly's eyes without any reaction. Kelly looked away first, trying to shake off the awkwardness with a laugh. "What was with that 'who is this' yesterday? That was some pretty bad acting." Still, I remained silent, staring at Kelly. She became uncomfortable under my gaze, shifted in her seat, and continued talking. "Look, you can't make it on your own without us. You're nothing but trash." I almost reacted to Kelly's harsh words, but managed to restrain myself because I could hear the tremor in her voice. Kelly must be putting on a brave front. So far, Jake had been silent, just watching how things unfolded. "Stop being so stubborn and come back home," Kelly berated me with harsh words. trying to confuse and drag me back home. The more excited Kelly got, the calmer I responded. I don't have a family, do I? Oh, I do have parents, but you two aren't my family, are you? I said. Kelly, for her part, probably felt out of her depth. She started talking loudly. What are you talking about? You and Dad are my family, right? Hey, Dad, that's right, isn't it? Kelly must have felt at a disadvantage alone, so she asked Jake for help. Jake looked around nervously and, seeing that no one else was around, seemed relieved and started talking to me. That's right, you can't live without us, just like Kelly says, so you're coming back. Jake began to act all high and mighty when he saw my parents weren't around. Looking back, I realized what a cowardly man he is. As I said before, I have no family, I answered firmly. No matter what Jake and Kelly say, I'll keep treating them as strangers. Jake and Kelly are not my family. If they were, they wouldn't treat me like a slave. Family is about holding hands and helping each other. When someone in the family is in trouble, it's normal for the family to support them. However, Jake and Kelly were different. They've been treating me as a servant and an outlet for stress for over 12 years. Jake and Kelly insist that this is normal. They're unaware of how terrible and wrong it is. They've been oppressing me unconsciously. I'm amazed I've put up with it for 12 years. I'm impressed with myself. It all started when I saw Kelly peeking from behind Jake. I was bound by my own words to raise Kelly into a fine adult. Because of these words, I've been desperately serving Jake and Kelly. That's why I endured until her high school graduation. I had decided that when Kelly graduated from high school and was ready to leave, it would be time to draw the line. I had a faint hope that Jake and Kelly would change their attitude towards me by then, and we could be a family. But they betrayed my expectations, leading to this situation. Everything was decided by their attitude the day before the graduation ceremony. So I'm facing them with the appropriate attitude now. Jake and Kelly are no longer my family, which is why I don't treat them as family. Kelly started to change her tone, realizing the seriousness. We are family, aren't we, Mom? Stop putting on this silly act, please. Before I knew it, she had switched from calling me old hag to Mom. Apparently, Kelly began to understand that things wouldn't go as they used to. Jake watched anxiously as he looked at me and Kelly. You may not be my birth mother, but we've lived together all this time, so please listen to my request. Kelly unfolded her crossed arms and clasped her hands in front of her. She had been sitting back, but now she was leaning forward. I have no obligation to listen to requests from someone who isn't family, I continued, keeping my emotions in check. Tears appeared in Kelly's eyes as she pleaded desperately, please listen to me. That note was a lie, right? You're not really going to sell the house, are you? It can't be true because you are part of our family, Mom. I felt disgusted by the way Kelly said Mom. What concerned her was the house, not me. She must be anxious about losing her home. It's true that the house will be gone. Is that what you're worried about? I asked. It seemed all that mattered was having a place to live, even if I wasn't there. No matter how much Kelly begged, my feelings wouldn't change. Kelly hung her head and cried. Jake, upset by Kelly's tears, lashed out at me. What kind of joke is this? Enough with your disrespectful attitude. What's with that note? Come back right now and stop the demolition. I responded with suppressed emotion in my voice. I can't. It's already decided. Do you think you can do this to your family and get away with it? Jake yelled. That's why I keep telling you, you are not my family, I replied, but neither Jake nor Kelly seemed to be listening. Enough already. Haven't I been saying we're not family? I thought, feeling like I was repeating myself. Jake suddenly stood up and slammed his fist on the table. Don't mess with me. I was shocked but kept my emotions in check. Who's messing around? You haven't treated me as family for 12 years, and now you can't suddenly act like it. That's impossible. My voice came out harsher than I expected. I was angry too, even though I didn't show it. Anger was bubbling up inside me like magma. I couldn't forgive Jake and Kelly's incredibly selfish actions. They trampled on my 12 years of suffering and efforts to become a family with them. They rejected, mocked, and exploited me extensively. I was left out, feeling lonely and in pain. I had wished countless times to be treated as family, but my wish was never fulfilled. It took me 12 years to give up. I continued to strive to build a relationship as Kelly's mother, as family, but it ended like this. A self-mocking smile appeared on my face. Seeing my dry smile, Jake and Kelly stared at me in shock. Jake seemed to lose strength and slumped down into his chair. These two never understood my feelings and tried to exploit me until the very end. I cared for Jake and Kelly, but they never cared for me. No matter how much I cherished them, they never cherished me. And now, when they're in trouble, they try to use me, claiming we're family, something they never believed in. It's too convenient. I feel not just a headache, but even nausea. Why did I put up with these people for 12 years? Looking back, it's strange, but it's pointless now. There's no future for the three of us together anymore. All I can do is make Jake and Kelly acknowledge their guilt and make amends. I no longer expect anything from Kelly or Jake, nor do I trust them. Jake stood up and apologized deeply. I'm sorry, please come back, I'm begging you. No matter how he apologizes, it doesn't resonate with me at all. I won't reach out to help, and I definitely don't think about living together. Enough already, I'm not your family anymore, I'm a stranger to you. Kelly also began to apologize deeply. I'm sorry, please forgive me. We're family, so I want to go back home together. I'm appalled by her selfish way of speaking. After treating me like a stranger for 12 years, now what? Come back because we're family? Did she think I'd be okay with that? That's too naive. No way. It seemed I could no longer keep my composure. Words I would never have said before came out of my mouth. I don't want to hear your excuses. I can't trust any words anymore. I definitely can't think of us as a family ever again. Then I placed a single piece of paper in front of Jake. It was a divorce form. Of course, I had already signed it. Hurry up and sign the divorce form. I'll file it myself. Write it here right now. Jake shook his head vigorously, then showed me a smile. Think it over, okay? I was shocked at how bad Jake was at the end of our life together. He really is a small-minded man. I had always misunderstood Jake's ingratiating smile. The smile he showed when we first met was a sleazy expression of sizing someone up. I mistook it for the smile of a kind person. Thinking about it now still makes me angry. I stood up and called for my parents in the back. My parents then entered the living room. Jake's mouth hung open, as if his jaw had dropped. Father-in-law, he stammered. My father glared sharply at Jake, and my mother also looked stern. Just being glared at made Jake shrink and cower. I'm very sorry. Jake started apologizing deeply and forced Kelly to do the same. I've troubled you because of Lisa's misconduct. I thought I heard wrong. My misconduct? Was Jake still trying to evade responsibility? My father's eyebrow twitched, but he remained silent. Lisa, well, she left home on her own, so I was just trying to persuade her to come back, right, Kelly? Jake urged Kelly to agree with his ridiculous story. Lisa's misconduct. Don't joke with me. My father's loud voice echoed through the house, making the windows rattle. Jake and Kelly gasped quietly. My father stood in front of Jake, meeting his gaze. How can you say Lisa was being selfish? You only think of yourself. You really are a petty man. Then he turned to Kelly. You've done some terrible things too, Kelly. What did you think of Lisa? You did it again. My father's loud voice reverberated throughout the room. Kelly must have been really scared. Her body was trembling. My father stood towering over them with a stern look. Kelly, you've been causing problems at school too. I've looked into it. Using my father's connections, we hired a private investigator, and it turns out Kelly had been extorting money from a girl at school. The victim was too scared to confide in anyone, but my father arranged for her to file a criminal complaint. Kelly, with wide eyes, exclaimed, "She ratted me out, didn't she?" I felt like I had seen Kelly's true nature. She hadn't reflected at all. She was only thinking about getting through this situation. "And you, Jake, you've been embezzling money from the company." This too was revealed by the private investigator. Jake had been making fake business trips. I hired the investigator to strengthen my case for divorce, but the investigation uncovered appalling facts about both of them. "Why, how could you even? Was it her?" Jake reacted just like Kelly, showing no remorse at all. They were so bad at accepting their fate. Neither of them would escape punishment from me. They would face societal sanctions too. Then my mother spoke up. "All right, the discussion is over. Sign the divorce papers and leave this house immediately." Jake, sobbing and muttering "no, no," gave up when my father handed him the pen. He sat down and signed the divorce papers. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 8:00 p.m., and the last train was at 8:25 p.m. If they missed it, there would be no trains until tomorrow morning. In this small town, there were no other means of transportation. If they didn't catch the last train, Jake and Kelly would miss the demolition scheduled for tomorrow. They probably hadn't packed their bags, thinking they could persuade me. While I was hesitating whether to tell them, Kelly suddenly said something unbelievable with a sulky attitude. "But this divorce was initiated by you, right, Mom? Dad, you should get alimony." Kelly must have been desperate after being exposed. My parents looked shocked. "That's impossible. What you two have done is outright domestic abuse and a crime," I said. Kelly, momentarily taken aback, retorted defiantly, "Show the evidence then." I placed a notebook on the table. "This is a diary I've been keeping since we got married." Kelly glared at me with a mocking look. "You don't even have a smartphone or computer. What kind of evidence could you possibly have?" "You seem not to know that a diary can be substantial evidence. It's not just videos, audio, and pictures that count as proof," I explained. Kelly looked dumbfounded. "Yes, our lawyer agreed too. This diary is valid evidence." Jake and Kelly finally hung their heads in resignation. I exaggeratedly checked my wristwatch. "The last train has already left. I guess you can't get back home tonight." Mother also looked on with a smug face at Jake and Kelly. "That's right. There are no taxis around here either. I wonder if there's even a decent hotel nearby. Well, our business here is done. Get out now." Jake and Kelly were rushed out of the house. They probably couldn't believe the last train left so early. I watched them hurrying toward the station from the second-floor balcony. As I watched Jake and Kelly's flustered backs, everything that had been building up inside me began to flow away. There were still some loose ends to tie up, but it felt like it was finally over. Jake and Kelly missed the last train and, unable to catch a taxi, ended up walking for about an hour to a hotel. The next day, when they got to the house, the demolition had progressed, and they managed to salvage only their clothes. Actually, I had temporarily stored the furniture, appliances, and my personal items in a warehouse, but I didn't tell Jake and Kelly. I got a report from the lawyer that the divorce was finalized, including a claim for alimony. Jake was reluctant to pay, but his company was pressured to ensure the payment. According to the private investigator, Jake was fired from his company for embezzlement. Kelly ended up getting involved with the police and was expelled from both college and high school. Jobless, Jake could only afford to lease a small, old apartment far from the station. He lives there with Kelly, who dropped out of high school. Kelly blames everything on Jake, and Jake criticizes Kelly at every opportunity, leading to endless arguments between them, as reported by the private investigator. I was considering what to do next after quitting my part-time job at a real estate agency. Then my father suggested I help with the family business, and I got a job managing his resort real estate company. Living in a resort area is quite different from city life, but being surrounded by nature is a refreshing change. I've also started keeping a dog, so living alone isn't lonely. Right now, this dog is all the family I need. I think I'll just live a relaxed life with my dog from now on.